For what? Oh, okay. So we give up some of our freedom for order. Okay, fair enough. Let's kind of dive into this a little bit tonight, because here's part of the questions that we get into when I think it gets into politics. And so there's a lot of things that are going to be kind of swirling a little bit tonight, and that is this. How do you go about determining then right from wrong? How do you go about determining that? Because it's been really fascinating to listen to some of the Trump, some of the Hillary stuff, but then some of the Kaepernick stuff, then some of the other NFL teams, and then people are getting all upset at the NFL teams. Some of them are liking the NFL teams. And it's all like, okay, how did we even go about determining what's right and what's wrong, though? I mean, have you really thought through that? Because we live in a culture now that is really battling with that very issue, which has implications for what we're going to continue to talk about tonight. How do you go about determining right from wrong? We have rights, right? That's what this country was founded on, that we all have inalienable rights. And so, while we're not going to get into this specifically tonight, you might say a woman has a right to do whatever she wants with the fetus within her. Or we might say, well, no, the baby within her has equal rights as well. A right to live. When does it become murder? And we'll deal with crime actually here in the coming weeks. But how do you determine right from wrong? What right do we have to freedom? Where did that right even come from? Those are big issues. Those are big questions. Ones that I think we often don't really answer very well, but it has huge implications for everything that we're going to talk about. So here's what I want us to think about tonight. Here's the first thing, and you can fill it out in your notes there. Here's the deal. Lucas and I were sitting there kind of mulling over all kinds of things here this week, earlier. And really the government's job, okay, is not to establish right from wrong. They don't establish right and wrong. All they can do is wisely govern the principles of truth that were already established by God and ultimately by Jesus, who is God, which raises some interesting discussion there as well. Because here's the deal. I mean, as Mary Ann was talking to the fuel earlier, that God created everything. And when you create everything, you are ruler over everything. Since none of us have created anything, we can't really rule anything. We'd like to think we do, but we'll come back to more about that, though. But here's the deal. Legislation often follows morality, doesn't it? And often, not even the majority, but the people in power lobbying for their agenda. Legislation follows morality. Now, follow me on this, okay? Because this is important for us to think through. 50, 60 years ago, it was not legal for a black person to ride on a bus with a white person. Now, you would say, okay, finally we woke up and we realized that is not right. It never was right. But legislation actually caught up with what was right already. That God had made us equal. God had made us unique. God had made us all special. Those are truths that were already there. Legislation finally caught up to it. Now that's a good example where it was started out bad, turned better. But there's other issues that you say 50, 60 years ago. The idea of homosexuality would never have been tolerated. And now What? Well, now we don't have to, it's not an issue of being illegal and you see where the agendas and the legislation follows our own morality. And if you look at what the founding fathers would say, they say the moment that you depart from the truths of the scripture and left to man's own will, the society will crumble. And I think that has become more and more evident. But tonight we're going to kind of deal with, as this election thing kind of continues and as we are thinking about the whole politics of things, I think there's even bigger issues for us to be wrestling through, though. And tonight we're actually going to try to talk about and see what Jesus would have to say dealing with some of the healthcare issues, which honestly for me, I have a very vested interest. One, I still live with brain tumors. I've been through a 12-hour brain surgery, cost me $212,000. I can tell you the wackiness of costs. I can tell you from Trevor, most of you know him. My son, who is now 12, has been through months and months of stay in hospitals and literally is our $1 million kid. I often look at the prices and the things that go on with that and like, this is absolute absurdity. We can talk through healthcare issues, but I think there's maybe even more important issues to talk through. So let's quickly kind of go through this. Last week we talked about just your basic, simple overview, and I think it's on there again, just for you to kind of fill out. Basically, the general, and again, this is painting with a broad brush, but Republican would basically go this: individual rights, little government, and personal responsibility. Democrat would tend to say group rights, big government, more legislation, more control, so forth, and government responsibility. Now again, that doesn't always work that cleanly, and that's a general idea though. So you kind of get, now which is right? Well, it kind of depends. There are times where you might say one over the other. I'm not really here to get into that. I don't know that it really matters, frankly, because I don't think Jesus is really Republican or Democrat. I think he probably thinks it's kind of silly in a lot of ways. But the perfect theocracy, the perfect government is a true theocracy. Theocracy meaning basically this: God runs the show. Theo, God. God is the perfect king. That is what it will be for all of eternity. That's what it has been for all of eternity. It's really no different now, other than he has just given us the opportunity in which to try to govern ourselves, which you look throughout history has worked sometimes fairly well and sometimes not so well. We as a U.S., the United States of America, we have done fairly well, but we're pretty young, really. In the history of things, we're 200 years old. You get into the history of the world and some of the governments and civilizations that were along were much longer. And you look at their decline and what caused it, and it gets pretty interesting. But we don't have time for that. So we ultimately long for heaven. We live in a fallen state. We live in a corrupt world, and sin basically affects everything. But tonight we're going to look at these three passages. These three are basically the same, told from Matthew, Mark, and Luke. So go ahead and turn to Matthew 12, if you would, and we're going to look at this story. Because here is an issue of Jesus dealing with healthcare in the midst of the government officials, the religious leaders, who were actually the same thing in that day, for the most part, not entirely, but Matthew 12, go ahead and turn to verse 9. Here again you see where Jesus was trying to be set up by the religious leaders of the day. If you were here this weekend, Pastor Lucas called it clickbaiting. That's basically the whole idea that you see on Facebook or whatever else, where they get you to click on something that really has nothing to do with what you're actually going to read. But here's the deal. So if we follow along in verse 9, it says, "He went on from there and entered their synagogue. And a man was there with a withered hand. Some would actually say this guy might have been a carpenter or a mason or something like that. Might have even been his right hand, which would have been his dominant hand, this hand that he would have done the majority of his work with. And they asked him, is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath? For the purpose that they might accuse Jesus. Because if you remember, you couldn't work on the Sabbath day. And so in an effort to keep everything holy, they had set laws on top of laws on top of laws to make sure that you didn't break the law. So Jesus said to them, well, which one of you has a sheep? If it falls into a pit on the Sabbath day, will you not take hold of it and lift it out? Of how much more value is a man than a sheep? So is it lawful to do good on the Sabbath? Then he said to the man, stretch out your hand. And the man stretched it out, and it was restored, healthy like the other. But the Pharisees immediately went out and conspired against him and how to destroy him. Now let's put this into perspective. Who has a favorite little pet? Okay? A lot of us have a favorite little pet. I have a pet. I would not call it my favorite little pet, but it is a little pet that runs around our house. I think it's more like a dust mop, but that's okay. Maybe an overstuffed rat. At least it's friendly, so it's okay. But here's the deal. On the Sabbath, here's the question that Jesus is really posing to these guys. These guys are saying, okay, this guy's got a withered hand, and they're trying to set up Jesus to go, is it lawful for you to heal this guy on the Sabbath? And Jesus says, well, if Fluffy were sick in the middle of the night, would you take care of Fluffy? Or little bunny Foo-Foo? Of course you would. Of course you would. Now, there are some animals I may not, but even though I have a dust mop, I probably, if she went into sudden convulsions, I would probably take care of her. Or have someone else in our family do it. Of course you would. Jesus is saying the same kind of thing, though. He goes, if you're willing to take care of little bunny Foo-Foo, why would you not take care of a man? It's the same reason we have 24-hour ER. Of course we'll do what we can to take care of somebody. Even if it's on the Sabbath. Even if it might cause you to work. And for us, I think we kind of lose the idea of the Sabbath in a lot of ways. But what's interesting is the Pharisees were operating out of their own hypocrisy, weren't they? I mean, the Pharisees, you think about it, they were focusing on the particulars, and they missed the whole bigger point, didn't they? And again, it's easy to get caught up in the particulars and miss the point. And if you follow along, that's actually in your notes there. So don't focus so much on the particulars. Now, what's interesting about it, if you think about it, so what did they do? They got mad, and they went to what? What does it say they did after that? They were so mad at Jesus, they did what then? Did it say it again? Yeah, they plotted to kill him. So here they are. They're worried about Jesus healing a guy and breaking the law on the Sabbath. While in the very next breath, they walk away in such anger that they're willing to kill a guy. Isn't that just mind-blowing in a lot of ways? So which is more important? A sheep or a human? dog or a human? One kind of human over another kind of human. Which human is more important? Why? You get into interesting issues there, don't you? Is a younger person more important than an older person? Is abortion an issue? Is euthanasia? We're willing to kill out of inconvenience the young kid. The old folk that is dying, we're willing to kill off as well. You get into a lot of interesting issues there, don't you? And what's interesting, if you look over time, our morality keeps changing, doesn't it? It keeps changing. And honestly, the path that we've been on, it keeps getting worse. And so what do? We make laws to accommodate our morality. When we step away from the things of God, then our morality changes, especially in the absence of truth. And what you find here, when Jesus says this at the end, Jesus is Lord over the Sabbath. He's Lord over all. In fact, Mark 3, it says it this way. Mark 3 says, when he looked around about them, with anger, he was grieved for the hardness of their hearts. And what's interesting in this passage is it's one of the few passages, there's a couple others, where you actually see Jesus' feelings. And he's just grieved by the hardness of their hearts. So what do we do here? Well, here's something I want us to kind of think through. Here's when it comes down to the issue. Is the heart of the matter when it comes down to health care? Let's just be honest about it, okay? It doesn't matter if you're Democrat, if you're Republican, if you're whatever in between. Hospitals, insurance, drug companies, and legislation is big business. Billions and billions of dollars of big business. And no longer, it's interesting when you look at how a lot of hospitals started, many of them out of Christian, either pastors or nurses or something like that, that kind of wanted to help kids or help whatever. It has turned into a monstrosity of money. Because here's the deal. We live in a capitalistic society. Let's just call it what it is. If there's money to be made, we'll make it. That is our opportunity. Both parties are guilty of the greed of the almighty dollar. All the laws, all the legislation comes down to that issue, really, doesn't it? What's going to best benefit me and my people and my powers of position? And I think some days Jesus must just sit down and look at us, much like he did the Pharisees, and grieve. And go, why do you miss the point? We have Obamacare. Oh, great. Obamacare came to save the day. No, it really jacked up everything. Was it an attempt? Yeah, it was an attempt. Was it flawed? Yes, it was flawed. Was it out of greed? You bet it was. Was it any better than what was previous? No, not really. It's all the same issue. It just plays out differently, doesn't it? And Jesus is grieved. Let's look at Matthew 25. Go ahead and turn to Matthew 25, because here's another passage that I think is really important for us to look at as well when it comes to this issue. Matthew 25, verse 31. Follow along, and it says, And here's the deal. I mean, you talk about Jesus being grieved and settling the score. But when the Son of Man comes in his glory and all the angels with him, then he will sit upon his glorious throne. All the nations will be gathered in his presence, and he will separate the people as shepherd separates the sheep from the goats. He will place the sheep at his right hand and the goats on his left. The king will say to those on his right, "Come, you are blessed by my Father. You will inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the creation of the world. For I was hungry, and you fed me. I was thirsty, and you gave me a drink. I was a stranger, and you invited me into your home. I was naked, and you gave me clothing. I was sick, and you cared for me. I was in prison, and you visited me." Then these righteous ones will reply, "Lord, when did we ever see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you something to drink, or a stranger and show you hospitality, or naked and gave you clothing? When did we ever see you sick in prison or visit you?" And the king will say this, "I tell you the truth, when you did it to the least of these, my brothers and sisters, you were doing it to me." Then the king will turn to those on his left and say, "Away from me, cursed ones, into the eternal fire prepared for the devil and his demons. For I was hungry, and you didn't feed me. I was thirsty, and you didn't give me your drink. I was a stranger, and you didn't invite me into your home. I was naked, and you didn't give me clothing. I was sick, in prison, and you didn't visit me." And again he says, "I tell you the truth, when you refuse to help even the least of my brothers and sisters, you are doing it to me." You follow along in your notes there, it says this, that the church needs to get back into the business of helping those in need. It should not be our government's job to meet the needs of all the medical needs of this country. It's our job. It's our job. Now, here's where this road leads. When we begin to take it upon ourselves to make a difference, it does get very messy, very complex, and yes, you are battling the almighty dollar. And I mean, there's all kinds of conspiracy theories out there about whether the cure for cancer has been already found, but money's covering it up and all that kind of stuff. We can get into the bigger issues, and we don't have even time to begin to scratch the surface. But we do have the issue for us that we can do something about, and it's our job. So what will we do? So, if you follow along, how do we go about establishing right from wrong? Because here's the issue. Everybody has a worldview. There is no such thing. I mean, here's the deal. Like, it used to be kind of popular, and it kind of still is in some ways, to just have absolute anarchy. Which basically is this: no laws. That would really be cool if we didn't have any laws, wouldn't it? Like, we wouldn't have to worry about speeding. We wouldn't have to worry about, stealing. We wouldn't have to worry about, murder. We wouldn't have to worry about anything. We just go, everybody just free, entitled to themselves. Your opinion's fine. My opinion's fine. We all just live in this happy society. And, think through the logic of that. It doesn't exist. And it never will exist. We'll try to be, it's kind of the epitome of the coexist sticker. Is basically, the line of thinking of that bumper sticker is basically that. Let's just get along with everybody. Everybody has a right to everything. There is no standard that kind of rules anything. We just kind of do whatever we want. That doesn't exist, and it never will exist. Because really, basically, when it boils down to, whoever holds the most guns, the ability to enforce their will win. Or whoever holds the most gold, the ability to buy whatever they want, will win. Or, and now I think, and this one's even a bigger one potentially today, whoever holds the most information. Think what would happen, and this is a much bigger deal than most people really think about. Think what would happen if a foreign nation were to attack our electrical grid, and all of a sudden your lights went black. You had no power. Now some of you would say, oh, no big deal, I can just fire up my candle. I got my flashlight. That's cool for a day, maybe two. Then you start to think, oh, I'll just run down to the gas station and get some gas. No, you won't. You don't have any power. I'll just go to the grocery store and grab some bread. No, you won't. They don't have power either. Think what happens. Whoever holds the keys to the electrical grid is a much bigger deal than we think. Now, do we have reason to be scared? Well, maybe, but in light of eternity, no, not really. Because again, I think Jesus often just sits down and kind of cries over us or laughs over us. I don't know which it would be. But look at this. Ultimately, Jesus is Lord over all things. Jesus is Lord over the Sabbath. Jesus is Lord over all. He created it. He is it. In fact, John 14:6, he says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one gets to the Father but by me. He didn't say, I bring the truth. He says, I am the truth. You want to know what truth is? You're looking at it. That's what Jesus said. He is the truth. He is the king. He is the author. He is the basis of all morality. And thus he ought to be worshipped and obeyed. Because here's the deal. If you have no absolute standard in which to appeal to, you have nothing. Other than you think your opinion's better than my opinion. And I say whoop-de-doo because I'll beat your butt down. Right? And that's what it comes down to. If you have no absolute standard in which to appeal to, you have nothing. Secondly, though, mercy always trumps law. Mercy. You think what Jesus did with that guy. They were trying to set him up, and Jesus says, you know what? There is something greater than the law here. There is something greater than the rules. And that we should err on the side of mercy over fairness. This will mess with some of us. Because some of us really like to have things fair. Don't we? Everything's got to be fair. Everything's got to be equal. I mean, generally as teenagers, that's a big issue among teens. But it's not just teens. Let's just be honest. Our culture as a whole wants everything to be fair, don't they? We establish rules so that we can be fair. And that we don't take away someone's rights over another's rights. But really, that doesn't even exist in reality. John 13:35 says it this way. They will know us by our love. When it comes to healthcare, what are we doing to love? What are we doing to extend mercy? You know, here's the real reality along with this. If we do that, if we extend mercy, if we extend love, if we extend a hand to those who are needy, you might as well expect persecution to come your way. Why do I say that? Because it happened to Jesus. And we're not going to be any better than he is. It will come. We will be serving those that can... Here's the challenge. I want you to think through this. We will be serving those that can never repay us at times. Serving those that don't come to our church and may never. We do it because we're called to do it. We serve others because, well, they should be saved. And we've been given the gift to serve them. It's an honor. Again, the church needs to get back into the business of helping those in need. We as a group, we as individuals, need to get into the business of helping those in need. It shouldn't be an issue of relying on my government. It shouldn't be an issue of relying on my church or relying on the leaders to do that. It is our job. And to avoid a spirit of entitlement. You think about that. That is a very difficult thing to do. Because we all believe that we are entitled to something. We're entitled to a car as soon as we turn 16, aren't we? No, you're not. We want to say we are. We are entitled to a new phone, or you pick whatever it is. We are entitled to new shoes. We are entitled to pick out whatever it is. It doesn't really matter. There's a gazillion things you could choose. We have this idea that we are entitled. And I would encourage you to think through this. Be grateful and avoid the spirit of entitlement. Let me give you a practical example of where this collision occurs. Some of you have experienced this. I have experienced it from multiple angles over the years. When it comes to the idea of scholarships. Now, we put great emphasis on college scholarships and sports scholarships and yada, yada, yada. But I can tell you just even from practical scholarshiping here, the challenge becomes, how do you establish rules in which to govern the giving of scholarships or not? And what is fair and what is not fair? Is it right? Is it wrong? Did they do what they should have done? Did they not do what they should have done? I can go down the list of scenarios. And I can go down the list of people that I have often said, okay, we're going to give a scholarship, but what are they doing? And we get into easily, the entitlement works both ways. And the fairness dynamic works both ways. And here's the challenge that I know I've talked with Rick numerous times about and really appreciate, is erring on the side of mercy and grace is always the better way to go. Sure, you may get taken advantage of at times, but that doesn't matter. We're called to be generous. We're called to be merciful. Tomorrow when you walk into your school, you're not going to answer all the healthcare problems. I know that. And I can tell you this, Trump and Hillary will sit and battle back and forth trying to answer all the healthcare problems. They're not going to do it either. They aren't going to do it. Is one better than the other? I don't know. Maybe. All I know is this. When I go to the gym tomorrow, or when I go to the high school tomorrow, or when I go to Walmart tomorrow, I have an option in which I can extend mercy. I can do something and make that a way of life for me. And so here's what we're going to do. We're going to break up for a minute. We're going to break up into kind of discussion groups. And I'm going to give you a chance to kind of just wrestle through a few of those little questions on the back of your sheet there. You may not get all those answered, but I'm going to give you about 5 minutes or so to kind of split and just pick one of the two. And kind of wrestle with that. So